Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang Sanghang namasami. Namatu acharyasa. Many Luang Pors. Naturally enough, perceptions of Luang Por varied considerably from monk to monk, reflecting their own differing experiences and ideals, biases and projections, and the clarity of their minds. Some sought to be close to him. Others, more self-sufficient, kept themselves at a greater distance. Different aspects of his teachings appealed to different monks, and there were various opinions as to where exactly the essence of it all lay. For Ajahn Manindo, who, like Ajahn Sumedho, had begun his monastic life in a monastery with an emphasis on solitary, formal meditation practice, it was Luang Por's more group-oriented approach. As a quote, "The thing that most attracted me to come up to Ubon was that fragments of a teaching showed that Luang Por was really committed to training his monks, which was something that I had not seen elsewhere. What characterized Luang Por's teaching, as far as I could see, was his insistence on our learning to live together as a community. Meditation, of course, that's what we're here for, but that we should also view our communal monastic lifestyle as central to practice. Somehow I got the message that was what he was about, and I realized that's what I needed. It wasn't that he'd tell you all the answers. He was there for you. He would listen to you and give you space to experiment. Get it wrong. His teaching was an invitation to figure it out. He seemed to see that his job was to get us established in the monk's life, but that it was then up to us to do the practice. There was the feeling that he wasn't going to take you and guide you step by step through the teachings and various stages of meditation. He said he wasn't interested in giving daily interviews. This was clearly not his way. It was giving you the guidelines of how to live as a monk. I didn't take that as an abandonment. It was freedom. Personally, I welcomed it. To Ajahn Manindo, it was Luang Por himself and the quality of attention he gave to his disciples that was most inspiring. Here he felt was a teacher, quote, who was going to be there for whatever situation that might arise. Luang Por made them feel like they were his sons and was always concerned with their welfare. It's a quote. He was available as a human being with a good sense of humor. He could share a joke with you. He could share your suffering with you. You felt he understood you, that he knew what you were thinking or going through. You felt he was there for you in your life and your struggles and your joy. Ajahn Manindo cherished the memory of the daily visits that Luang Por made to his kuti to check on his condition during a period of illness. He also appreciated being able to speak to Luang Por when doubts and worries threatened to overwhelm him. I remember going to see him once, full of doubts. Luang Por just sat there and listened. He must have heard that kind of thing 1,000 times before, but I really felt he looked at me and saw me and he said, I felt like that once. I felt like my head was going to explode or split open. I doubted so much I thought my head was going to burst. I know what it's like, but never mind. Working like this with doubts makes you stronger. Venerable Warupanyo agreed that kind words and gestures could be more memorable than profound teachings. Quote, Luang Por had visited us briefly at Wat Pah. It was afternoon. We were outside, and he came up to me and looked me over. He felt my ribs, and with a very concerned look on his face, remarked how skinny I'd gotten. It was not only my mind that had been freaking out. For many months afterwards, I remembered that look of concern. A turning point in Venerable Wat Pah Pong's monastic life came with the opportunity to be Luang Por's attendant. He said, "In the afternoon when water hauling is finished, you can come here and clean up." My first reaction was, he's got a lot of nerve, telling me to come and wait on him. But apart from being one of my duties, it was a foot in the door and a privilege. Through it, I was to start seeing that there was a way of life in the monastery, rich, structured, and harmonious. And at the center of it all is the teacher, who is someone to be relied upon. And finally he asked, why was I so skinny? Immediately, one of the monks who was there told him that I took a very small ball of rice at mealtime. Did I not like the food? I told him I just couldn't digest much of the sticky rice, so I kept cutting down. I had come to accept it as the way it was, thinking I was so greedy that eating less and less was a virtue. But he was concerned. Did I feel tired? Most of the time I had little strength, I admitted, so he said, I'm going to put you on a special diet for a while. Just plain rice gruel and fish sauce to start with. You eat a lot of it and your stomach will stretch out, and then we'll go to boiled rice, and finally to sticky rice. I'm a doctor, he added. I found out later that he actually was an accomplished herbalist, as well as having knowledge of the various illnesses monks are prone to. He told me not to push myself too much. If I didn't have the strength, I didn't have to carry water, etc. That was when the magic really began. That was when he was no longer just Ajahn Chah to me, he became Luang Por, Venerable Father. Most of the Westerners who came to Wat Pah Pong with the intention of becoming monks had read a lot of Buddhist books and carried with them ideas of how a monastery and an enlightened master should be. It was often when Luang Por confounded those expectations that he made the deepest impression. For Ajahn Amaro, it was a generous smile at a time when he was expecting to be admonished for a mistake. At the time, Ajahn Amaro, still a novice, was serving as attendant to the then abbot of Wat Pah Chah, Ajahn Pabakaro, during an overnight visit from Luang Por. To quote, I woke up and saw light coming through the gaps between the planks and the walls of my hut. I thought, wow, the moon is really bright tonight. I looked at my alarm clock and it said 1 o'clock. Then I realized my clock must have stopped. That's not the moon, that's the sun. So I leapt up, gathered my robes on, and raced down the path. When I got to the back of the Dhamma hall, all the other monks had already left an alms round, except Ajahn Pabakaro and Luang Por, who were going on a shorter route. I thought, okay, I've still got time. Maybe they didn't notice. So I started to prepare their robes for alms round, hoping they didn't see that I'd arrived late and had missed the morning chanting and sitting. While I was kneeling down by Luang Por's feet, tying up the tags at the bottom end of his robes, he said something in Thai which I couldn't understand. I looked up slightly anxiously toward Ajahn Pabakaro for translation. Luang Por had a big grin on his face and a wonderful, friendly, loving smile. Then Ajahn Pabakaro translated, "Sleep's delicious, huh?" For Ajahn Kemanando, another British-born monk, a key moment occurred when he unexpectedly saw his teacher in a new, more approachable light. One day, newly arrived and still wearing the white robes of the postulant, he had been chatting with a friend on the balcony of his kuti when, glancing down the path, he had been shocked to see Luang Por. And he was calling out and beckoning with his hand. We thought he was going to scold us for not meditating diligently. But Luang Por didn't seem bothered at all. He wasn't telling us to stop talking, but calling to us, "Come here, come here." It transpired that Luang Por was on a monitor lizard hunt. He was very fond of the forest chickens, which he would feed with rice in the area around his own kuti. He wanted to protect them from their natural enemy, the large monitor lizards, which like to eat their eggs. He had tracked one of these lizards to this part of the forest and now mimed an explanation to them of how to fix a string snare to the end of a bamboo pole. He was going to catch the lizard and have it banished from the forest. The two clumsy, inexperienced Westerners, goaded on by an enthusiastic Luang Por, thrashed around unsuccessfully for some time, and finally, after enjoying a good laugh together, gave up the hunt. What struck me most about this little episode was the contrast between Luang Por the lizard hunter, displaying a very natural spontaneity and down-to-earth, almost childlike simplicity and humor, and the awe-inspiring formality of his role as head of a large, important monastery, which, up to this point, was all I had ever seen of him. This had the effect of undermining many of my own preconceptions regarding what a great enlightened teacher was supposed to be like, and helped me to see that Luang Por was actually very natural and quite funny, which allowed me to feel less intimidated and more relaxed in being around him. For another newly arrived postulant, Sean, the memorable occasion occurred in a more formal setting. Sean is Ajahn Jayasaro. And if Ajahn Koesako's nickname was 4 baht 50, $4.50, then what Ajahn Jayasaro was Chon, which is spoon. So he was sort of spoon, come here. It was New Year's Eve and the Dhamma hall was jam-packed. We'd all gathered to see in the new year with Dhamma talks and auspicious chanting. As there was no space inside, hundreds more people were sitting out under the trees. The raised platform at the western end of the hall where the monks sat was equally packed. In the middle of the platform, directly below the large bronze Buddha image, sat Luang Por, surrounded by all his monastic disciples. It was a marvelous, thrilling scene. Suddenly, I saw a slight ripple pass through the rows of monks. One of the senior monks, his hands in Anjali, leaned towards Luang Por. Immediately, Luang Por got up and his sitting cloth was moved to one side. Shortly afterwards, an old monk wearing the brighter yellow robe of a city monk walked onto the platform. I couldn't help comparing him unfavorably with Luang Por, who always looked so immaculate. The old monk's robe was crumpled and kept falling off his shoulder. I was not impressed and wondered what Luang Por's reaction to a visit at such an inconvenient time would be. He answered me immediately with his humble and respectful demeanor. The old monk knelt down on Luang Por's seat, bowed to the Buddha in a perfunctory way, and then turned around to face the Sangha. Luang Por led all of his monk disciples in bowing to the old monk, followed by the novices, nuns, and lay people in their turn. It seemed to me that I'd never appreciated the beauty of a bow until I saw Luang Por bow that night. But more than that, what particularly struck me, and has stayed in my mind ever since, was the fluency with which Luang Por switched from being the center of all attention and a devotion to an ordinary monk paying respects to a senior. I felt that I was seeing a perfect expression of the teacher as head of a Sangha, but subservient to Dhamma and Vinaya. In speaking of the admirable qualities of their teacher, Westerners frequently referred to Luang Por's uncanny ability to adapt to the changing imperatives of situations and audiences, apparently without effort, and as if the most normal thing in the world. Interestingly, it was an ability rarely mentioned by his Thai disciples. The hierarchical nature of Thai society, the emphasis on social harmony, and prioritizing the needs of the group over the individual means that most people, including non-meditators, are quite accomplished in adapting to the social environment. It is likely that the more profound expression of this ability in a great spiritual teacher was thus less obviously special to the Thais than to the Westerners. The Westerners, for their part, felt inspired by what they recognized as an impressive non-attachment to social roles and personality. The sense that Luang Por could be anything at all because he identified with nothing whatsoever as an abiding self was captured well by Ajahn Amaro when relating the time he was asked to deliver a message to Luang Por at his kuti. I saw that he was sitting downstairs on his rattan mat. His eyes were closed and there was no one else around. When I went up and kneeled in front of him, he didn't open his eyes. And I thought, I wonder what I should do. I waited a few minutes, and his eyes were still closed. Some important Ajahn was waiting, so I said in Thai, "Excuse me." Then he opened his eyes, and it's like there was absolutely nobody there. It wasn't like he was asleep. The eyes came open, but there was no expression on his face. It was completely empty. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and said, "Luang Por, Ajahn Chu asked me to bring a message that some people have come to the Dhamma hall, and would it be possible for you to come and receive them?" Again, for a moment, there was no expression, just this completely spacious, empty quality in his expression. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, the personality appeared. He made some remark that I didn't quite catch the details of. It was as if suddenly the quote-unquote person appeared. It was like watching a being coming into existence. There was an extraordinary quality in that moment, seeing the personality, the body, all the characteristics of personhood, just being taken up like he was putting on his robe or he was assuming a role. Skillful means. If there is anything which distinguished Luang Por from his great contemporaries, it was his ability to guide a large and flourishing Sangha of foreign monks. It is true that Luang Dhamma Haboi and Udon usually had 5 or 6 Western monks with him, including Ajahn Panyawado, the greatly revered and most senior of all the foreign monks in Thailand. But it was Luang Por alone who was able to oversee a Sangha that had reached over 20 monks by the mid-1970s and is still growing to this day. The reasons for this success may be found both in Luang Por himself and the system of monastic training that he developed. Initially, it was Luang Por's charisma that drew people in. Over time, in his dealings with the foreign monks, he showed an ability to communicate with them unhampered by the obstacles of language and culture. Despite being unable to speak to them in their own tongue, his Western disciples felt that he genuinely understood them. Ajahn Kemanando noted, "He was very observant and could quite accurately assess the personality of an approaching newcomer by watching their faces, their postures, the way they walked, etc. Before they had even sat down or said anything, Luang Por might make a remark to those present such as, 'This one's full of doubt.' That subsequent conversation would invariably reveal to be true. Luang Por seemed to realize clearly how different the needs of his Western disciples could be from those of his fellow Thais. The local monks were largely from poor rice farming families. They tended to be pragmatic rather than speculative in character, and their defilements usually veered towards the more undisguised forms of greed, hatred, and delusion. Consideration of this influenced Luang Por's development of a training that emphasized going against the grain. The Westerners' problems, however, often tended to be of a more intellectual bent. They could easily get caught up in tortuous webs of thought and opinion. They struggled with difficulties hard for Thais to understand, particularly a baffling kind of self-aversion they called guilt. The Westerners found it hard to put forth concerted effort into meditation without dropping into old ruts of obsessively goal-oriented striving that created more stress and tension than inner peace. While Luang Por was not infallible in his treatment of the Western monks, he was adept at learning from mistakes. He soon saw how the authoritarian, occasionally hectoring tone to which the Thai monks responded so well didn't work with his foreign disciples at all. They had grown up with a distrust of authority, took criticism more personally, and responded much better to informality and kindness. Whereas most young Thai monks did not expect a personal relationship with their teacher, most indeed would have felt uncomfortable if one had been offered, the Westerners needed to feel seen, to feel taken under the teacher's wing. With the Westerners, Luang Por was noticeably less stern. He appreciated the sacrifices they had made to come so far and live in the forest, and so he made allowances. He quickly saw how effectively humor could dissolve his Western disciples' self-importance. But whereas most of the Thai monks believed that the more relaxed way Luang Por behaved around the Western monks, was simply a skillful means he was employing for their benefit, many of the Westerners tended to see in it a revelation of the real Luang Por. It was a common theme. Everyone tended to see their Luang Por as the real Luang Por. Luang Por reassured the Western monks that the difficulties they were experiencing were transitory and inevitable, given that they were taking on the power of defilements accumulated over uncountable lifetimes. It was, he said, like a very small army taking on a much larger one. Until you could marshal your resources and strengthen your forces, you should be prepared for a few humbling defeats. When he saw that the Westerners were downcast at how much harder it seemed to be for them to calm their minds than it was for their Thai friends, he explained that, although it was true that monks with little formal education found it easier to let go of attachment to the thinking mind than their more educated companions, they tended to be at a disadvantage in the development of wisdom. He compared the Western mind to a large house with many rooms. It took longer to clean than a simple cottage, he said, but once the work was done, it might be a better place in which to live. Maybe I'll leave it there.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.
So important. What's something that you found has worked for you for like guilt and self-aversion and all that?
Let's see. I mean, I think I wouldn't say that, any particular technique or particular practice worked for it, but the results of the practice itself kind of slowly bearing fruit and undermining those old kind of habits, those old karmic patterns, so that there's that sense of the looking back and sort of, that's not there anymore. Or memory or recollection. Oh yeah, in former times I would have, really spun out over this. And there's nothing there. So it's I think it's more like a cumulative fruit of the practice as opposed to any particular technique or even particular insight, really.
Apart from Luang Por Chah, I'm curious about the strongest impression or strongest impact a meeting with another teacher or two has ever had on you. Like the two other sort of meetings with another teacher that have had an impact of similar magnitude or felt as, powerful as well. in your life?
Well, nothing quite as say strong as Luang Por Chah, or of course, it's the feeling of, yeah. I mean, it has so many layers to it. But I've very strong connection with both Luang Por Ban and Luang Por Mahabua. They both were very kind to me, and their both their their presence and as well as their guidance was very important to me. Felt very really special in some way.
I remember listening to the talk and the Q&A with Ajahn Dick when he was here. And I remember him speaking about how that even when Luang Por Mahabua was very fierce with his disciples, that people could still feel sort of the compassion or the metta behind it. Yeah. Is that something that you experienced with Luang Por Chah or?
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah, very much so. Even because you see, oftentimes people will talk about the fierceness, and it wasn't that it wasn't there. It was, but it was something that was in the context of an overall one steady example that he set in the monastery, along with all the other compassionate and supportive teachings and gestures that he gave. And then when there was a strong admonition, then it wasn't taken in isolation. It's certainly okay. He wants to make a point. I better figure it out.
Were you ever blasted really hard for something?
Yeah. Yeah. Or just I remember one time, just even coming back from Pindabat, and he wasn't even blasting. He didn't say anything. It was just what he did, and like coming back from Omsra, it was hot season. It was just hot, and Luang Por was, he was really strict in decorum and how you wore your robes and how you did things. And one of the things that was a real no-no of going on Omsra and then coming back after Omsra and hitching up your robe onto your shoulder and trying to get some air underneath the layer of Sangati and Jiwan, where you're sweating like crazy in the hot season. So, and I had done that, but once I got into the monastery, I thought it was fair game to, I hitched up my robe, and Luang Por was coming toward me, and he put his hand up like this, and he looked kind of stern, but I was very unsuspecting, and then he sort of stopped, and I came up beside me, and he just pulled the robe down and then walked off, and it was like, whoa, my robe came down, but my heart came down as well. So, whoa, okay. Okay, I won't forget that. But yeah, it was, he was, he himself was meticulous, and so that sense of hitching up the robes, it's a dukkata in the Vinaya, and you can argue for it, a way around it, but that Luang Por had a standard. That's what he expected other people to take. So. Okay.